Hi everybody, Olive here. Happy March. I'm here to talk to you about what I read in February 2015 and what I'm planning to read for March 2015. The first book I finished was The Beauty Myth by Naomi Wolf. Like I said in my last wrap-up in TBR when I was still currently reading this book, it is an absolutely transformative read. It changes the way you think about the beauty standards in this country and in this world, really, and makes you really dig deep into yourself about whether or not you should be subscribing to something that clearly is not productive and positive for women. And I myself have decided that subscribing to unrealistic beauty standards is not something good for my life. This book was not only a fantastic read, but changed the way I think, so 5 stars. The second book I finished was The Magician's Lie by Greer McAllister. And again, like I said in my last wrap-up in TBR, this author is a playwright, and this is her first novel, and it is very, very apparent that she is a playwright and that most of the attention is focused to the dialogue, and the prose of the novel itself just is very lacking. You don't really get any kind of sophisticated storytelling. It's essentially a better worded outline, unfortunately. I really, really wanted to like this book. The description sounded fascinating, and they compared it to The Night Circus, which is one of my all-time favorite books, but it lacked something. It was a book about magic that lacked magic. The first audiobook that I listened to this month was Triumph of the City by Edward Glaeser, and I talked about this one in my last video as well. It talks about big cities and what they have done for human civilization and why restricting development of big cities actually hurts people in the long run. It really stresses that urban growth helps us all. It talks about how the fact that cities attract poor people is actually a good thing because those people are going to be presented with more opportunity in a city than they would in the rural countryside. If a city is not attracting poor people, then it's not doing its job, because poor people are attracted to cities because they want to improve their lives. So if a city does its job, it will present opportunities to improve poor people's lives. Then it will attract more people who will endeavor to do the same. This book was absolutely fascinating. I loved listening to it. I felt like I was really understanding more about why cities are so important and why they attract the amount of people that they do. The next book that I read was Get in Trouble by Kelly Link, and this was a series of short stories. I do not have a large background in reading short stories, but I absolutely loved this collection. I listened to an interview with Kelly Link on NPR, and she says that her stories use nighttime logic, where everything, or at least most things in her stories, are identifiable and recognizable as being part of our real world, but there's just something different about them. They just follow a different kind of logic. For example, there's one story where there's a birthday party with a bunch of young teenage or preteen girls, and one girl who has everything she wants gets a present, and that present is a life-size animatronic boyfriend. So essentially a robot boyfriend. The stories are really kooky and playful. They're otherworldly and a little spooky, but always entertaining. My 2 favorite stories in that collection were The Summer People, which was such a strong start to the collection, and Secret Identity. The other audiobook I listened to was Zoe Heller, What Was She Thinking? Notes on a Scandal. I then proceeded to watch the movie, which starred Cate Blanchett and Judi Dench. This was a story about a teacher at a school in England who becomes involved with a student, and then you hear about this whole story through the narrator, Barbara. Barbara is an older teacher at that school who befriends Sheba, the woman who gets involved with the student, but she has different reasons for doing so. It was a very interesting story. It was a very quick listen on audiobook, and I gave it 3 stars. I enjoyed it, but it didn't blow me away. The final book I read in February was City of Thieves by David Benioff, and the reason why there's a bookmark in this is because I immediately put this into my husband's hands and said, "You must read this." This book, I found out, I think I knew beforehand, but then was reminded after I started reading it, was written by David Benioff, who is one of the creators / writers for Game of Thrones. As you can probably tell by his last name, he is of Russian extraction, and this story was based off of a story that his grandfather, who is Russian and lived in Leningrad during the siege of Leningrad during World War II. This was based off of his story. This was a fantastic book. It's really short, and so I absolutely flew through it, not just because of the length, but because of the pacing. It is just so well done. I think I probably got more out of this than the average person because I know a good amount about the siege of Leningrad and about Russia and Russians in general. But this is a very, very accessible book. It did not make me angry, as most historical fiction I've read that takes place in Russia does, because I can't stand inaccuracies. The story is essentially about two young men who are captured by the police for separate crimes. I won't say what those are, but instead of being executed for their crimes, as most prisoners were, a general decides to send them on an impossible quest to find a dozen eggs for his daughter's wedding cake. I gave this 5 stars. I can't recommend it enough. The only regret I have about the reading of this book was that I did not pair it with the nonfiction book, The 900 Days, which talks about the siege of Leningrad, and that book was actually consulted by David Benioff during his research for this book. So I think it really would have added something, but because this is definitely something I want to reread, I will probably do it alongside of that. The first book I'm planning to read for March, I'm currently reading right now, and that is In the Woods by Tana French. This is the first book in the Dublin Murder Squad series. I've already read the second, The Likeness, and absolutely loved it. And I was planning on reading The Secret Place, which is the latest book in the series, but since then I have gotten my hands on the rest of the series. And so I started this one, and it is fabulous thus far, and I can't wait to continue. It seems like it's a very timely thing for me to be reading this right now because I've seen other booktubers talk about In the Woods lately and seen it on Instagram and other social media platforms. So I don't know why we all seem to be reading it at the same time, but it's a great book, so let's all read it. The nonfiction book I'm reading right now is It Was a Long Time Ago and It Never Happened Anyway, Russia and the Communist Past by David Satter. The title of this book really, really intrigued me, and its subject matter is about what I expected it to be, and it talks about how hard it has been and how unwilling the Russians have been to accept the horrors of the communist past. It is extremely well written. Books that are kind of academic like this are not always readable. They use elevated language, which I think sometimes is appropriate, sometimes not. But this book is extremely easy to read. It is really catching my attention, and you can see I'm already plowing my way through it, and it's only early March. So I'm very interested in reading more about this. Not only is it diving into the history and giving me a lot of history that I didn't previously know about, which is impressive. It also talks about the ways in which the Russians need to be confronting their communist past in order to be able to move forward. A book I have on hold at the library that I am eagerly anticipating the arrival of is The Poser by Jacob Rubin. This is a book about a man who is a master impressionist. He can imitate almost anyone until he meets a special young lady, of course, and cannot imitate her. And so he must tear down the walls and lose the facade and try to find himself. It's kind of cliche, but I'm interested in the premise. This may be another case where I'm interested in the premise of a new book and then I end up hating it, but I'm willing to give it a shot. Remember how I said I don't read a whole lot of YA? That's not true this month. I have one book on pre-order that's going to be coming in very, very soon, and that is the second book in the Winner's trilogy, The Winner's Crime by Marie Rutowski. I can't say too much about this one, obviously, since it is a sequel, the second book in a trilogy, and I don't want to give away anything from the first book, but I won the first book, The Winner's Curse, from a Book Riot giveaway, and I didn't expect to like it as much as I did, and I am very interested to see where the story goes. Very interested to see what happens with Aaron and Kestrel next. Another YA book that I'm going to listen to on audiobook is Beljar by Meg Wolitzer. I heard this one talked about on Book Riot, and it's about a girl who goes off to an alternative school after I think some sort of traumatic event. She is entered into this special literature class in which they're reading the Bell Jar, and then I think some magical realism starts to enter the picture. That's really all I know about it, but it captured my attention, and Meg Wolitzer has been an author that I've really wanted to get into, and I'm actually hoping to read The Interestings later this year, so I'll be very excited to start listening to that one today, I think. The last YA book that I'm going to be reading that I have pre-ordered and I'm just awaiting its arrival is A Darker Shade of Magic by V.E. Schwab, and I know this one is heavily magical. It has been getting amazing reviews. It is set in a alternative magical London, and that's really all I need to know. I am also going to be doing a little bit of traveling this month. There is one book that I'm planning on listening to on the way and returning from my destination, and one book that I'm hoping to read while I'm there. The book that I'm hoping to listen to, which I may or may not get a chance because it may already be checked out at my library, but that is Dead Souls by Nikolai Gogol. And this is a Russian classic that I've wanted to read for a very long time. I really need to get more into Russian classics. And this is about a man who buys the names of dead Russian serfs, meaning slaves, from wealthy landowners and wants to mortgage them in order to turn a profit and become a wealthy businessman. It is such an absurd concept and so profoundly Russian. I am really looking forward to giving this one a listen, and if I like it, I hope that will provide a door to reading more Russian fiction. And the book that I'm planning on reading while I am away for a little while is Gilead by Marilynne Robinson. And this book is talked about all over BookTube and really on Book Riot, especially the podcast. They absolutely love Marilynne Robinson and speak very highly of this book. This book has won a Pulitzer Prize. I found this first edition at a used bookstore and was thrilled, and yeah, I am very excited to see what all the hype is about. Those are the books that I read in February and the books I will be reading for March. I really hope I can get to all the books that I set out to read this month. I think there's a good chance I will, being that it's still technically winter until almost the end of March, and it's still kind of gross outside, so the desire to stay in and read is high. Thank you so much for watching. If you have anything to add to this video, if you've read any of these books or have any opinions, please feel free to leave them in the comment section below. You can find me on both Twitter and Instagram at @abookolive. The link to my Goodreads is down below if you'd like to be friends. Have a wonderful day. Happy reading. I'll see you next time.